Hi, and welcome to We're on ECMO, a video series for the ECMO community. And today I have with me Deidra Fellows, the ECMO, ECLS, MCS clinical specialist at AdventHealth in Orlando, Florida. Thanks for joining me today, Deidra.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
My question for you today is, what are some of the hurdles in starting and maintaining an effective ECPR program? I know you guys do a lot of those at Advent, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
That's a loaded question. It could be broken down into so many questions.
Sure.
I think the biggest hurdle to starting an effective ECPR program is to first have an effective ECMO program.
Okay.
I think that you have to have the volume to support an ECPR program. And I think when you do start an ECPR program, you need to be able to look down the road into the future. I think that I personally believe that you probably need to be in a community big enough to support a resuscitation program, much like that Dr. Yiannopoulos has in Minnesota and Dr. Marinero have out in New Mexico. But to start an effective ECPR program, to bring it back down to the basics, is I really believe you need to have an effective ECMO program. I do ECMO, I do ED ECMO podcast. I think that that's a really good thing for people that are in the ECMO world to follow. And Dr. Marinero in New Mexico really broke down the Inception trial really well. And I think that that's the thing that a lot of people are going to. And this is, I'm going to follow back around to get into the basics and starting that ECMO program from this. I think that one of the things, if you watch ED ECMO and you listen to the way that he broke down the Inception trial that they did, I think in the Netherlands, right, where they were like, oh, ECPR, 6 of one, half a dozen the other. You know, the outcomes were about the same for out of hospital cardiac arrest for traditional ACLS as they were for ECMO. I think that he really broke it down well when he said, hey, you can have a small group of people that do something really, really well and have really good outcomes and grow out from that. Or you can have a bunch of centers that know a little bit about it, don't really manage the patients really well, don't really initiate really well, and then you may have poorer outcomes that skewed that study. So you really have to kind of take it with a grain of salt. So I think basic, you have to have that really good ECMO program. We're fortunate enough here to have Dr. Silvestri that took our ECMO program under his wing. We have been doing this for, I think, 9 years now. I've been with the program for almost 8 years now, maybe 10. And we got in with ELSO, you know, really early in our program, really started tracking those numbers, really worked hard to follow ELSO guidelines, which is basically, you know, that's our evidence-based practice for ECMO. Following those ELSO guidelines, working towards getting our platinum, you know, excellence award so that we could hold our own feet to the fire and really focus on process improvement. Now, once we actually started training our own ECMO specialist and got a really good team built, a really good rapport, all of our ECMOs go into one unit, cardiac and respiratory, got our staff trained up really well. Then we started going, hey, you know, instead of bringing these people in here coding, or instead of like, we have this here, we need to expand it out to our population. That's when we started testing the waters and going, hey, you know, our APP Bradford's loose right now. He's not in OR. Let's go take a look at this patient that they're coding, you know, in the women's center, maybe a postpartum cardiac arrest, or, you know, one of our post-cardiac patients. And that just kind of grew out from there. It just kind of flourished from there. It wasn't something that was planned. And we were like, hey, we can do this. We're doing this without any plans in place. And that's kind of where we grew out from there. And we were like, hey, we need to do this better. You know, we're doing this. We need to do it better. Let's build a cart. And then finally we were like, hey, you know, if we plan on doing this and continuing to grow and our volumes are as high as they are, we need to be official for this. So that's when we said, hey, you know, we need the supplies, we need the equipment, we need a process. We put a process in place. And now we have built our ECPR policy, our ECPR standard of practice for our ECMO specialists that kind of grew out, developed who we thought our team was going to be. That's really important. You have to figure out who your cannulators are going to be. As for now, ours are still our cardiac surgeon, our cardiac surgical team. But as we grow and as that volume grows, you know, we really realized that we need that cannulator in-house 24/7. So then we had to develop education for our ECPR. We actually have an ECPR simulation that's been built. We have our cardiac surgeons and our cardiac APPs that have volunteered to come in and help our cardiac critical care medical team start training them up on even accessing the groin. They get there, we have a pathway. After we want to get them on within 60 minutes. And we've gotten somebody on here in 27 minutes from the time they called the code. And we have a huge hospital, the second largest hospital in the United States. So getting from our tower with all the ECMO supplies to another tower and having to fight the elevators and getting all that equipment over there and the team over there, that was phenomenal. And that was prior to having, that's when we realized, hey, we need to have a groin box in our cardiac ICUs. In our ER, we need to have that groin box there so that our critical care doctors now, it's part of our process. Once you start CPR, you've done that 2 minutes, we need to do that quick assessment. And I mean, you can go on to any podcast, or ASIO just did a really good one for ECPR, how to start an ECPR program with Duke, University of San Francisco, University of Mississippi. I think there was somebody else on there as well. And I watched it just to see if we were in line. And that quick assessment, you can find that anywhere. Go to University of New Mexico, Dr. Marinero's, or go to University of Minnesota's and look at Dr. Yiannopoulos', and you can see that quick assessment there. So we're like, hey, 2 minutes of CPR, known cardiac cause, less than 70. Those people out there can go, okay, we know this is probably going to be an ECMO, and they'll initiate that ECMO team. Then we go over there. Our critical care doctors can go ahead, open up that groin box and have those wires in. And then when our cannulators arrive on the scene, the cannulation card is there. We just start handing stuff over. The ACLS team has education. They know that they're ECMO aware, so they know they're supposed to continue CPR until we get them on flow. So, I mean, it's a huge process. That's why I said that's kind of a loaded question. You really have to, number one, have that good ECMO program already in place. And then number two, you need to have a pathway for ECPR. Number three, you have to have a well-trained team in place that's going, and everybody knows what their roles are when they arrive at that ECPR, that ACLS ongoing code. And definitely less is better when you develop your supply box. Some people have kits, we have a cart, and people are always going, hey, we need to add this to it. And I'm like, no. That's postcode. After we get them on, we can go find them. Less is definitely better. I think when I teach classes, I ask people, do they have kids? Most people have kids, you have kids. Yeah, well, if you have a daughter or son or whatever they like, you buy them that Barbie doll or that G.I. Joe with the kid wants to put everything on it all at once. And, G.I. Joe's walking around with everything. Yeah. Dude, all he needs is the one weapon. Let's start small. So that's definitely the key. Less is more when you're talking about your supplies and equipment, only what you need. Awesome. It just really clears the air. It makes the code go very, very smooth, and definitely assigning those roles. You cannot have more people in the room than is necessary. Now, that was a lot in one question.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That's great. I think that'll be really helpful for a lot of people. Just kind of a quick follow-up question to that is how much training, education, run-throughs and things are you doing to maintain, I guess, the competency? I guess maybe your volume's high enough, but what would you say people should be doing to prepare for those moments?
Our bedside nurses have to go through a 6-hour course just to work in the ECMO unit. And that covers a lot in comparison to other courses that I've looked at. And that's just so they know basically what they're doing, how it affects ECMO and how what the ES is doing affects them. Most of our ECMO specialists were nurses on our unit at one time, a respiratory therapist on our unit at one time. We have a mixed team of respiratory therapists and ECMO specialists, and that's a whole nother podcast that I could talk about for many, many reasons. And they have to go through 5-day course for ES training, which includes simulation, wet lab, and then they're didactic, and then they have to do at least 4 weeks of training at the bedside. And mind you, these people have already been taking care of ECMO patients as a bedside nurse or a bedside respiratory therapist. And then they have to maintain their wet lab and high fidelity simulation competency at 32 to 40 hours a year.
Okay.
And that's outside their bedside pump time. And included in that wet lab simulation is the ECPR simulation. We bring our critical care team in here, our critical care physicians and APPs into simulation, especially into that ECPR simulation. But I would say that one thing that facilities really need to think about when they think about how they're going to choose their cannulators and how they're going to train them is to really think about groin injuries, vascular repairs. That's something that you really have to keep in mind. And look at your ECMO cannulations. How many of those have had to have vascular repairs? Who were the cannulators and things like that? So those are the kind of things that you want to think about when you start thinking in that direction. And those are the discussions that are going on in the background here. Again, that's not my area of expertise. I'll probably be the one that has to put the process in place, but
Sure.
That's kind of above my pay grade. That's the surgeons and the physicians, and of course our upper level leadership that will decide what's best for our facility.
Yeah.
So each facility really has to look at that. That's the big one. That's the key. You really need somebody in-house 24/7 to have an effective ECPR program. And I can say we did one this past weekend, so we've done 14, and we're hanging out right at 39% survival to discharge. We even transitioned one ECPR to heart transplant that went home so far this year. So we're doing something right. But again, it's our surgical team that's doing all our cannulations right now. And that's even a growth process for us at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing all that information and sharing from your experience. I see more and more people interested in ECPR, a lot of people talking about it. And so I think it's great when we have the opportunity to learn from others who are kind of in the trenches and out there doing it. So I thank you for taking your time and being generous with your knowledge and experience. If people wanted to connect with you in the future, they could find you on LinkedIn, correct?
Yes.
Deidra Fellows, that's how they could find you on there. Again, thank you so much for joining us. If you're watching We're on ECMO today, we're thank you for watching. And if you have a question for an experienced ECMO professional that you would like to see answered, make sure that you reach out to me, Neil, NEIL at ECMOadvantage.com. Thank you so much. Have a good one.